There's a specific kind of attention almost everyone has felt the absence of, even if they've never put words to it. You're mid-sentence, explaining something that matters to you, and you can feel the other person already drifting, already waiting for their turn to speak, already halfway to a response that has nothing to do with what you actually said. And then, every so often, someone does the opposite. They lean in slightly. They ask one more question. And without realizing it, you feel something shift in your chest that has very little to do with logic. Most people assume attraction is built through confidence, charm, looks, or status. That belief isn't wrong exactly, but it's incomplete in a way that misleads almost everyone who hasn't lived long enough to notice the gap. What most people don't realize is that older men, the ones women describe as having a quiet, almost unfair pull to them, often rely on two words far more than they rely on charisma. Stay with me here, because this takes some unpacking. Think about the version of attraction most people are taught, usually without anyone directly teaching it. It comes from movies, from advice columns, from 1,000 small cultural signals. Be witty, be impressive, be the most interesting person in the room. Win her attention through performance. This isn't entirely false. Performance can spark initial interest, but here is what matters. Performance creates a flicker, not a pull. A flicker fades the moment the performance stops. A pull deepens the longer someone is around you. And almost nobody, when they're young, understands the difference, because nobody has lived long enough to watch both kinds fade or grow. Imagine this. A man sits across from a woman at dinner. She mentions something offhand, a small detail about her week, nothing dramatic. A younger version of most men might nod, maybe make a joke, and move the conversation towards something more entertaining. But this man does something else. He says, "Tell me more." This is where things become interesting. Two words, no charm required, no clever timing, and yet something happens in her expression that no joke could have produced. We'll come back to exactly why that happens, but first, consider what's actually being communicated underneath those two plain words. Picture yourself in a conversation where the other person is visibly waiting for you to finish so they can speak. You can feel it before they even say anything. There's a particular tension in being listened to that way, a sense that you're an obstacle between this person and their own next sentence. Most conversations, if you pay close attention, work exactly like this. People aren't usually listening, they're reloading. The deeper truth is this: most people go through entire relationships, entire decades even, rarely feeling like the content of their thoughts is actually interesting to the person across from them. They feel tolerated, sometimes admired, occasionally desired, but fully curious about? That's rare enough that when it happens, it registers as something almost disproportionate to the size of the moment. Now we move deeper, because this is where the real distinction between younger and older approaches to attraction starts to show itself. A younger man, still operating on instinct and cultural script, often believes attraction is something he generates through his own output, his jokes, his stories, his confidence. He is, in a sense, always performing, even when he doesn't think of it that way. And to be fair, this can work for a while on people who haven't yet learned to distinguish performance from presence. An older man, one who has been through enough relationships to watch infatuation curdle into resentment, or watched a partner slowly stop talking because she sensed nobody was really listening anyway, learns something uncomfortable. He learns that being interesting is far less powerful, long-term, than being interested. He learns that the people he has felt most pulled toward in his own life were rarely the most impressive talkers. They were the ones who made him feel like his thoughts mattered enough to be fully heard. So he stops performing, at least as the primary tool, and he starts asking. Tell me more becomes less of a technique and more of an instinct, because somewhere along the way, he discovered that genuine curiosity creates a kind of magnetism that wit simply can't replicate. This is where the pull begins. Not attraction in the loud, immediate sense most people imagine, but something slower and, in its own way, far more powerful. Consider the moment those two words are spoken. In that instant, the woman across from him isn't being flattered. She's being invited to keep existing exactly as she is, mid-thought, unfinished, unpolished. There's no pressure to perform her own thoughts more cleverly. There's only permission to continue. What happens next is important, because this kind of permission does something that confidence alone rarely manages. It lowers the instinct to self-edit. Most people, especially women who have spent years being interrupted, redirected, or quietly told their stories were taking too long, develop a habit of shortening themselves in conversation before anyone even asks them to. Tell me more, interrupts that habit. It says implicitly that there is no rush and that the fuller version of what she's saying is worth the time it takes to say it. But before we go there, there's something deeper still worth sitting with. Think about why curiosity, real and sustained, feels so different from flattery. Flattery focuses on the listener's reaction. It says, in effect, look how impressive you are. Curiosity, by contrast, focuses entirely on the speaker's experience. It removes the listener from the center of the moment and places the speaker there instead. And ironically, this is far more disarming because almost nobody is used to genuinely being the center of someone else's attention without an agenda attached. This is where attraction, the kind that older men seem to generate almost without trying, actually originates. It isn't generated through what he says about himself. It's generated through how completely he allows someone else's thoughts to occupy the space between them, even briefly. There is something deeper happening here, and it has to do with what people are actually starved for in most modern relationships and conversations. In a world saturated with distraction, where most conversations happen with one eye on a phone, where most listening is partial at best, sustained curiosity has become almost rare enough to feel like a kind of intimacy on its own. When someone asks you to continue and actually waits, actually wants to hear the rest, it can feel disproportionately powerful precisely because it has become so uncommon. The scarcity itself adds weight to the gesture. An older man, often without articulating this consciously, understands that he doesn't need to compete with charm or youth or status in the conventional sense because most people aren't actually starving for entertainment. They're starving for the rare experience of being fully listened to without interruption, correction, or impatience. Now we move deeper still, because this is where the entire idea reaches its core. The deepest truth is this: those two words, tell me more, are not a technique for attraction at all, not in the way most people understand technique. They are the natural output of a man who has stopped needing the conversation to be about him. And that shift, the shift away from needing to be impressive and toward genuinely wanting to understand someone else, cannot be faked convincingly for long. People sense, almost instinctively, the difference between curiosity used as a strategy and curiosity that comes from an actual absence of ego in the moment. This is why younger men, even when they learn the exact phrase, often can't replicate the effect. They say the words, but their eyes are already calculating the next move. The woman across from them senses, somewhere beneath conscious awareness, that the curiosity has an agenda riding underneath it. An older man, having genuinely let go of needing the conversation to serve his own image, asks the same two words and means something completely different by them. And this reframes the entire original question. The question most people start with is, what can I say to attract her? But that question assumes attraction is produced through clever input, through the right combination of words deployed at the right time. The deeper, more honest question is this: have I actually become someone capable of being curious about another person without needing anything back from the moment? Because the words only work once that internal shift has already happened. Before that, they're just words, and people can tell. So the better question isn't about technique at all. It's about whether you've reached the point where someone else's unfinished sentence is more interesting to you than your own next clever remark. Once you reach that point, you won't need to manufacture charm. You'll only need two words, said honestly. And the pull that follows won't be something you engineered. It will be something you simply stopped blocking. If this opened something for you, there is much more beneath the surface of how genuine attention, far more than charm or confidence, shapes the kind of connection that actually lasts. Stay close. This understanding is only the beginning.